Good morning, everybody. We're going to do something a little different with this week's moment of gratitude. Let me say, staff, and let me say, congregation, you are still awesome. You are still loved. You are still valued. You are still tremendous. And I'm still grateful for you in every way imaginable. But this week, we are going to celebrate you virtually through our social media handles. It's the World Series, and in honor of the esteemed October Classic, we thought we could list your accomplishments in baseball cards. So look at the emails, look at Facebook, look at Instagram, so we can celebrate the wonderful collection of gifts and skills and people that we have here at Sardis. And what I want to do with this moment of gratitude is thank you collectively for something else. I want to thank you, the people of Sardis Baptist Church, for allowing our worship to extend beyond the time constraints of a Sunday morning and to extend beyond the walls of Sardis. I'm standing in front of our virtual animal blessing. This is a consortium and a collage of images that we've received over the years that celebrate and offer gratitude to God for the special pets and creatures and animals in our lives. And I think it's amazing that this piece of art allows us to extend that praise and thanksgiving and that connection to God beyond a single moment in time. The same can be said of the words that you offer, the prayers that you offer, the energy that you offer, the relationships you offer, not only on Sunday morning, but throughout the week. So I want to extend my deepest gratitude for your ability to extend worship, to live worship, to make this a community of joy, a community of God's presence, most importantly, a community of God's transcendence. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thanks be to God for each of you.
Today's lesson comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. Hear now these good words. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth and show deference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. Then Jesus said to them, Whose head is this, and whose title? And they answered, The emperor's. Then Jesus said to them, Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Every morning when I wake up, I gladly accept the breath that God has given me. I roll over and I see a partner who God, again, in all of her infinite wisdom, has seen fit to add into my life. I walk down a hallway to look in on two little girls who God made and who have transformed my life in too many ways to count. I walk downstairs, often unmindful of the shelter above my head, built from natural resources like wood and clay and stone. I fill up a coffee maker with water from flowing streams. I add in coffee beans harvested from the earth by the hands of people fashioned in God's image. In just the first 5 minutes of my day, I accept a substantial amount of God's provisions. Can you imagine how long that list of provisions would be if I tracked an entire morning or even an entire day? It's funny, though. I don't ever remember racing to the post office at 11:58 p.m. on April the 15th to settle our annual account. To my knowledge, I've never paid God's park ranger to admire a tree-lined walk or to pull over to the side of a mountain road and explore a serendipitous waterfall. I'm certain I've never paid a fee for God to acknowledge my credentials, nor have I ever stood in line at one of God's agencies hidden in a suburban office park on the other side of town in order to convince one of God's bureaucrats that I have my proper documentation to throw a party or to drive a vehicle or to enhance a property. Or better still, to prove to God that I was born, that I am a person, that I have existence. Or even worse, to have a loved one go and prove to God that I no longer have breath. In the past, when I've preached today's sermon, I've spent an awful lot of time seeking to discern the line or the threshold where we stop rendering to Caesar and we start rendering to God. In other words, I've often wondered, at what point does our conscience chase off the tax man like a moonshiner chases off a revenuer? Sidewalks and schools and hospitals, those are all fine. Yes, please, 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 more of those. But what happens when the coins we collect are used to fund nuclear arsenals or to create programs that intentionally harm our most vulnerable neighbors? What happens when Caesar's programming is at odds with our faith? In an election year, especially this one, we want Jesus to be more specific. What will the courts allow? Who's the candidate of the God movement? How far can I go and not get an unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach? What would you do, man? Of course, Jesus never gives us a prescriptive answer. Jesus just says, render to Caesar what's his. Give God what's hers. How annoying. It's like watching City Slickers when Curly tells Billy Crystal's character, Mitch, that the secret to happiness is that one thing. But Curly never actually says what that one thing is. And then Mitch comes home with a baby calf named Norman, and all of a sudden he's discovered nirvana. Does that mean that we should all go be dude ranchers for a week? I digress. Jesus' response points the accountability and the heart rendering back toward us. Jesus tells us we've got to decide for ourselves what provisions we need from Caesar and what we need from God, and where those result in competing interests, and how we will render or give back to the source of our provisions. In other words, Jesus reminds us that we've got to reconcile our obligations to both God and Caesar alike. This week, in my floundering attempt to make Jesus give me a more qualified answer, I saw our text in a light I had never considered. It occurs to me, this isn't a passage about pocket change, let alone taxes, let alone any sum of money. Instead, I think this is an illustration of God's vastness juxtaposed against Caesar's finiteness. God's vastness, Caesar's finiteness. In the Jerusalem temple, a pointed reminder of God's constant, generous, salvific power and grace. In the Jerusalem temple, a living monument to the Exodus story, the one that unfolded back then and the one that is still unfolding right now. Religious and political leaders want to talk about pocket change. Pocket change? Really? The Pharisees, ardent and even authentic proponents of Torah fundamentalism, are at odds with the Herodians, apologists for Rome's regressive taxes. And though staunch enemies, the two groups team together to trip up Jesus on a legal technicality. Pay the tax, and you offend righteous Jews. Refuse the tax, and you risk sedition. How taxing, pardon the pun, such pettiness must have been for Jesus. In this story, there is tangible audacity. In the presence of one who channels divine truth and on the site of a building intended to celebrate divine presence, these two groups want to condemn their opponent over taxes. Taxes. But here's the thing. There is no time, there is no circumstance, there is no realm where anything we receive from Caesar can compare to what we receive from God. Yes, Caesar can take away your breath, but Caesar can't give it. Yes, Caesar can document and register your life, but he can't recreate it. Caesar's very existence is beholden to a revenue stream. If the source runs dry, so too does Caesar. Caesar's very existence is contingent on either the willful or compelled or forceful support of the people. If his support topples, so too will his kingdom. But God on the other hand, God creates. God gives breath, and God gives life, and God gives being, and God gives existence, and God gives value. Sure, God's not going to turn down our tithes, and yes, God will always invite us into loving partnership, but God's magnificence, God's love, God's very existence, none of these are contingent on our own generosity, nor our subordination, nor our approval, nor even our acknowledgement. Friends, God is creator. God is creator. Caesar is created. And here's one more glaring distinction. Caesar, a created being, a subordinate of God, insists on a world of subordination. But God, the creator of the universe and the supervisor of all things, insists on a world of partnership and collaboration. Perhaps the greatest miracle of the universe is not the creation of our planet or the parting of the seas or even the fact that bears can hibernate. Amazing, I know. But instead, the greatest miracle of our universe is God's humility. So, when Jesus flips that coin in the air, I hear a pin drop. Because what I realize instantly is that I live in a world where so often I am distracted by the finite miracles of Caesar, and because of these distractions, I fail to render gratitude for the infinite provisions of God. I fail to see the vastness, the generosity, the depth of our Creator. Caesar requests my signature and my money and my vote, and even in the best of cases, my submission. And if I can't or I won't give these things, both he and I are weaker for it. And in 99% of instances, my punishment for not providing these things will be exacted. It will be swift, and it will be transactional, and it will be blind of empathy. Caesar will call this practice fairness or justice, but I would call it rigidness. God, on the other hand, requests my heart and my mind and my strength and my soul. And even when I can't give her some or all of these things, or even when I won't give her all or some of these things, God is no less whole. God responds with empathy and with grace and with love. And even though Caesar might call this quality inefficient or weak or even nonsensical, I call it justice and righteousness. Jesus reminds us that a tax to Caesar is like a single provision of Torah. Each have the ability to burden us. It's not that either are wholly good or wholly bad. Instead, it's that we get so bound up in following secular and religious laws with precision that we often forget to honor the very things these laws or codes intend for us to do. And we get so twisted up, so contorted, we convince ourselves that paying a municipal tax or healing the lame on Sabbath are anathema. Is God so small, so like Caesar, that the application of tax code or a rigid literalism are the only ways to ensure against alienation and abomination? Of course not. God's more complex than that. God has more depth than that. God is love, not law. And in his little exercise, the flipping of a coin, Jesus demonstrates the hypocrisy of those who seek to entrap him. They are not interested in the intent of law, but rather its weaponization. But what happens when you, the accuser, reveal that you use the very same coin to fund your temple enterprise as the one that funds the offenses you decry? You realize your pettiness in the midst of God's vastness. So, yeah, North Carolina can have its 7 cents on each dollar I spend, and I'll postmark my check to the IRS by April 15th. I use Caesar's provisions, and I will gladly pay for them. But if I'm going to render to God what is hers, that means that I need to be ready to call Caesar to account for funny math. In other words, if I choose to participate in Caesar's systems, I've got to be mindful of the places where such participation prevents me from being fully present in God's presence. God encourages us, and Jesus does too, to love God and love neighbor. In other words, God encourages us to render empathy, to render compassion, to render respect and dignity and hospitality to all of those we encounter, and to recognize our interdependence and rootedness in God and in one another. Sardis Baptist Church, that is the honor we're asked to render. So, in this season, this election season, this pandemic season, this season of change, I think the question to ask ourselves is this: do our actions model the honor we are asked to render? Do our actions model the honor we are asked to render? Good friends, may God give us hearts to act with our voices and with our votes and with our pocketbooks and with our choices and with our prayers. To act in such a way that we love God and we love neighbor. And may God give us courage to refrain from those actions that prevent the rendering of our hearts. May our eyes be averted from shiny coins and redirected to God's vastness. Friends, may it be so, and may it be soon. Amen.